Mr. Slobo, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. It is very interesting that you are talking about how the Eastern Cape is a sleeping giant, yet throughout the past 25 years, the Eastern Cape has been seen to be this part of our country that simply refuses to get where it could be.
Yeah, I think a lot is starting to happen now, because over the past few years, the potential, I would say, it has been mapped. People knew that there's something that could potentially happen in there, but there was not a lot of effort and investment, particularly when it comes to agriculture. But I think the conversation now is beginning to change. And this links to what is happening, I think, broadly on a national level, because the role of agriculture as one of the sectors that could deliver opportunities, particularly for the rural people, has somewhat gained some bit of a momentum. And I think with that, that's how the Eastern Cape is beginning to get that spotlight, and there's a lot that can be achieved there.
I mean, you're generally a very positive and optimistic person, and nothing wrong with that, of course. But the piece you wrote starts with this journey that you took at the invitation of some of co-op in the Eastern Cape, and it opened your eyes to various possibilities. Take us through that journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the key things that obviously we had been looking at on the Eastern Cape, there are broad challenges that are common to any other province. The discussion around land policy is no different than when you go to KZN or Limpopo, and that is still central when people think about investment in the province. And the issue of the climate change through the lower dam levels, the droughts, and all of those things, those are some of the issues that we began discussing, and they remain a challenge over that province. But also, there's now this aspect of the joint venture approaches, where some of the agricultural businesses, which have largely been outside of the province or within the province, but operating in certain regions and not really moving up, particularly to areas around the Transkei region. They're beginning to go there because there's availability of land, the water is available, the rainfalls are better than the other areas, if you take, say, for example, the former Ciskei region. And all of those things, they begin now to unearth some of the opportunities that people are beginning to go through. And in the projects or in the farm businesses that we have visited, a number of the successes that we have seen comes about with the joint venture on the financing side, where the government of the province availed some certain portion of the finance, and the agribusinesses availed some certain portion of the finance, and working with the communities and the common vision of really looking at development, not only just on a farm level, but also tying on the agro-processing discussion. Those are the successes that we have seen. And I think that's the discussion that needs to propel and go on a broader part of the province and also in the other provinces to begin to see that success. And if one viewer looks also even on a recent Treasury paper, which talked about a whole range of things on a macroeconomy, but if you focus on the agricultural pages in there, the aspect of a joint venture approach, the aspect of access to farming finance, it's being highlighted there, and also the aspect of the know-how on the skills, whereby those on the co-ops might be having some experience and knowledge that some who may not be been in agriculture for a long time don't have. Them working together, there begins to be something useful, and those are the fruits that we've seen in a number of projects in the Eastern Cape. And I think that if that can be replicated in a broader scheme, we can begin to see some positive things happening.
Well, the Treasury document is still subject to a whole lot of discussions and agreements. There's a lot pending there. But from what you were able to witness, from the government support that you're saying has complemented what has also come from the industry in that part of the country, would you say it is optimal?
I would say we are beginning to see what can potentially come out of that province. And I mean, if you single out, look at the Eastern Cape, you look at Limpopo, and you look at parts of KwaZulu-Natal. Those are the provinces that actually have a higher rate, relatively higher unemployment, relatively higher poverty, particularly Eastern Cape and Limpopo. And now when one looks at those provinces to say what can bring relief or what can bring some bit of a better stability in there, and agriculture comes at the center of it. And what we have seen through the joint venture approaches happening in those provinces is what can help in optimizing or maximizing the potential of those provinces. Right now, we're still really at the margins of doing that. But if both the private sector can strengthen that support, which for a few partners that we spoke to when we were on the ground there seemed to be some optimism in doing that. And now if the state also then can come into the fore and think about that blended finance model to say, how do we blend these resources together in an optimal way in all of these three provinces, not limiting it now to the Eastern Cape, but think of Limpopo as well to say, what can we do there? Those are the areas that I think can really give us something that is good. And I think we are even now thinking on a national side to say, how can this agriculture that we talk about it now and then to say it's part of what can give us as South Africa some bit of growth? Where can we expand? What can we do? There's really three provinces that I would say they are the next frontiers for expansion in agriculture. It is that very Eastern Cape, it is that KZN, and it is Limpopo. And what is beginning to emerge in the Eastern Cape, if it can be replicated, obviously learning from other areas as well, where there's some good examples blended into what we have seen there, those are things that can really bring some good potential and progress and improvement in living standards in those provinces.
Now, you're not the first person, of course, to say exactly what you've just said. I remember, I think it was the CEO of Agri-SA saying the very same thing here at a time, of course, when in the northern provinces of our country were facing drought, and the agricultural sector was appealing to government for support. Now, notwithstanding the potential you are saying is great there, it doesn't mean that the Eastern Cape and, of course, the other two you're talking about, KZN and Limpopo, are or will be immune to the droughts and other challenges that have faced the other provinces that had been doing well all along.
Yeah, I think though we are in climatic conditions, the discussion that you are referring to that you had, I mean, it hits the nail on the head in terms of the rainfall patterns. Yes, the Eastern Cape is not immune to the droughts, and all the other provinces likewise. But I do think that when you're looking on those southern east coast part of the province, the rainfall patterns tend to differ than what you see on the northern parts of the country. So in that perspective, there is some bit of an opportunity for focusing on those provinces. But I think the broader part of the discussion is that climate change is part of today's reality. And now if you're thinking about agriculture or any activity that you do on the outside that is dependent on the natural rains, you have to think of the better practices of saying, how can we expand this agricultural potential that we think about in the space where climate change is becoming a challenge. And there are better practices that are out there that can be applied, and South Africa is beginning to adopt some. And also even the technological applications that we use on the agriculture right now, either it's a short growing seed varieties and all sorts of things that we can actually use. But I think the infrastructure also on the water side, whereby a number of those rivers that flow down to the ocean in the Eastern Cape, we can think in the long run or medium term of really making sure that the water infrastructure and the dams that are needed, those are things that can be put in place there. But I think for the near term, saying the next 2 or 3 years, what can you actually practically do to make sure that there is improvement there? You have to work private sector, government, working with those communities and say what near-term resources can be put together to begin to roll out some of these projects. And I think that blended finance approach Storia was talking about, and the water rights that can be applied on other areas, those are things that can practically make some improvements in the communities. The very same projects that I said we visited, some were started about 2 years back, 3 years back, which seeks to say if there is a common vision within the next few years, there are some practical things that can bring improvement on people in those areas.
Now, black farmers in particular have been, of course, crying out, saying that they need to be listened to more. They need more assistance, and often the government doesn't listen to them. Just from your conversations with them, because I understand you did visit one particular project in the Eastern Cape, and what are they telling you?
Yeah, I mean, in my daily work as an agriculture economist, I talk to a number of farmers, black farmers, white farmers, across the spectrum. The issue that really comes up every now and then when you're talking to them, the issue of the finance, acquiring inputs, is one of the key things that many people are complaining about a lot. And the issue around the water rights, saying that they need to be and do all sorts of things in their farms. That's the other second thing that comes up a lot. And obviously issues around infrastructure, but those take time. Those remain some of the central things. And I think for me, some of the things that you hear a lot is accessing some markets for the produce after it has been produced. But a number of those things can be solved if now there can be enough incentives that are put aside so that blended or working joint venture approaches are happening, because the traditional commercial farmers who have access to particular markets, if they're working with some developing farmers on coming to stream, that enables them to leverage on their capabilities and accessing certain markets. And obviously the merging of the resources that can actually happen on there. And I think some of those things can be solved. And obviously there are still a large overriding issues that have to do either with the land policy and all of those things. But those will take time. And I think now, given in South Africa where we're sitting and the economic challenges that we are facing, one has to think also on the near term to say, while we are discussing the long-term matters, what can we practically do right now? And I think some of those things that I'm mentioning can be doable. And I think also, if you're listening to what the state, what the government is talking about, they're busy creating what they call sector master plans, agricultural master plans, and the other sectors of the economy master plans. And they're beginning to have a conversation that might be similar to this. And I'm hoping that in the coming weeks and months, when they begin to unpack some of these things, they will speak to the challenges that are on the ground, and we can begin to see some bit of progress.
Now, you've just been appointed to the Presidential Economic Advisory Council, and yesterday you had your first meeting. I'm not going to ask you what you discussed there, but to critics who have been saying, there have been policies, there have been interventions, there have been all these councils and advisory groups set up, but we need implementation now. What hope do you give, to people who watch these things happen, and they happen behind closed doors, but who wonder whether, in fact, they do achieve anything? And this is not your first sort of high-profile position, or advisory position at least.
Yeah, I think we are. This is different, and I mean those concerns that are coming from the people. I think those are well-meaning, because we're all feeling the tough economic conditions, and people are saying there's been NDPs, there's been all sorts of other policies, and they are not seeing the implementation. And I think the council that will be coming out is part and parcel of that, of redoing the diagnosis and looking also at the sequencing of the implementation and the various number of things. And I think the president alluded to what we will be doing in some of his speech yesterday. But I think that people have to give this a bit of some time and watch to see what will be happening. And obviously there will be official communication about what the duties of the council and what else we do on that side. But I think that there is a need, and what we'll be doing will generally be positive for the country. And obviously on the past other experiences, like the land reform one that we recently worked on, that process is still underway. And obviously people will have to watch and see what the pronouncement on the land policy stuff will come up to be. But I think all of these are useful in building South Africa towards to where all we aspire to see growth and see progress in the country.
And you're not saying this because you are part of them?
No, absolutely. I say this as a citizen of this country. We all want to see progress in South Africa.
Wandile Sihlobo, thank you very much for your time and insights this evening. He is, of course, an agricultural economist, and recently he was appointed to the Presidential Economic Advisory Council, which met yesterday for the very first time.